Hello and welcome back to Better Than Adventure. Last time I was here, I did the same thing I'm going to be continuing to do today. Hooray. You want to know something funny? You know, back in the day, it's kind of interesting how, like, as the gaming industry has matured, a lot of stuff has headed in a really weird direction. But it's like only as bad as you let it be, in a sense. What I mean is specifically like in regards to, the video game industry, AAA stuff. When people talk about how bad the AAA industry are, they are, like, generally speaking, correct. Of course, not if they're saying, random dumb stuff. If they're actually pointing at problems within the industry, then they're correct. But, and oftentimes I see people, like, point at how it used to be, how gaming used to be so much better. And no. Well, I mean, in a sense, yeah, but, like, I feel like whenever people say that, they don't realize that this was kind of inevitable, because the end, like, at some point, for instance, with live service games, somebody was gonna eventually realize that it's easier to manipulate vulnerable people than it is to actually make a good live service game, Eventually, someone was gonna figure out that the strategy to winning is, in fact, like, disgusting and gross and disgusting and gross. And really, while we can argue that, like, oh yeah, back in the day things were better, and to a degree, like, they sort of were, to be completely fair with you. I feel like that kind of misses the point. Because, yeah, though things were better, there were also a bunch of things that sucked. For instance, like, people like to glamorize, retro gaming, like, back when they were kids, like, take the SNES era, right? But the issue was, back in the SNES era, God forbid you were actually, like, playing video games if you were older. Like, imagine if you were, like, a 16-year-old back then, playing Final Fantasy, like, 6 or whatever. You would have been relentlessly bullied, man, because that's how things worked back then. Like, people were a lot meaner in real life in those kinds of ventures. I mentioned this earlier, but, like, sitcoms in the 90s and even some in the 2000s had the entire punchline being, look at this nerd and his nerd hobby and his nerd glasses and his nerd haircut and his nerd clothing and his nerd, that was the joke. It was, hey, isn't this guy a loser? Let's laugh at him. And basically, that was the joke. And so whenever people are like, gaming back then was better, in your cherry-picked examples, sure, but, like, so much of gaming was worse. I mean, I'm specifically referring to, like, the social aspect, because obviously, there are two aspects to gaming, one of them being the social community aspect, and the other one being the actually playing the games aspect. I mentioned before, the way people consume art is very much split between these two, and both of them are equally, like, important ways of looking at something, but they can't really work on their own, especially the social one. Obviously, when you view a work on its own, it's a lot easier to say, it's fine to view a work on its own in that way than it would be for somebody to say, like, oh, it's okay for me to not engage with this thing at all. But in general, like, the big thing that you kind of have to remember is just the fact that, like, gamers were oppressed for, I know it's like, the funny Joker meme from, like, a couple of years ago now, right? But gamers were genuinely, like, oppressed under the foot. Well, I mean, it wasn't actual oppression, right? But, like, saying that you were a gamer would get you made fun of in real life, would get you bullied or whatever. And, you know, funnily enough, like, those kinds of bullies that you would see, it's not that they never existed. I mean, they obviously weren't as common as they were in movies or whatever, right? But they also just straight up don't exist now because they would get bullied. I remember seeing a joke that was like, oh yeah, what a bully is like, hey, give me your lunch money. And then a bunch of other kids start calling him broke because things work different now. That kind of bullying just doesn't happen, you know? But it definitely did once upon a time. And that was back, you know, with the SNES era. And then we go into the PS1 and PS2 era. Especially, like, you know, with the PS2, with a bunch of, like, that was the birth of the gun and ball gamer. Like, going into the 2000s, right? Imagine if somebody asked you, what new game are you excited for? In, like, 2007. Or, like, no, let's say 2008, right? The little nerdy kid says, like, the Scott the Woz kid says, like, oh, I'm excited for Mario Wii. Is that 08? It's either 08 or 09, I'm forgetting, you know? Then the gun and bull gamer is like, I'm excited for Halo 3 ODST. Because that's the next. I actually forget when ODST came out, because I have only ever played Halo 3 last year on 360, and I tried to play the first game on, like, Zemu, because I was like, I'm not fucking buying the, like, fucking... I don't want to play the remake, because, as you can probably tell, I'm not really a graphics guy, and it was really endearing to watch all the little animations the guys did when they were, like, jumping off of the... Like, you know, when you take one of the... whatchamacallit vehicles... Like, when you jump off a cliff, they do the little goofy-ass animations and shit. And that was really endearing to me, and they don't do that in the remake, and, I don't know, I just kind of don't like that, and I like the... like, OG Xbox, like, early 2000s PC style of game. So, yeah, my apology. But yeah, basically, I played that for quite a bit, and then the emulator crashed mid-level, and it didn't save my checkpoints. And that was years ago, and I got really mad that it was the mission where you go up into the alien ship, and it crashed somewhere there. And then now, like last week, I played it again, got to the same point, and it didn't crash. So I just saved the game, and I haven't... I'll play through the games eventually, but it's one of those kinds of games which, regrettably I have never considered actually, like, recording myself playing. Because, you know, there are games that I've tried to play on my own just to see them. One of those was actually Gears of War. And that kind of made me realize that, at least in the early days, at least the gun and ball games you were getting used to be good. But, okay, but to continue my example from before, right? The fucking, you know, one of the guys would be like, yeah, I'm looking forward to Halo. The other guy would be like, I'm looking forward to Mario. Then, you know, the PS3 loser would be like, hey guys, I'm looking forward to the new Killzone. Haha. Should have been looking forward to one of the good games, like, Metal Gear Solid 4. But no, and then one of the guys, you know, the enlightened one amongst the folk would be like, yeah, I'm looking forward to Persona 4. What systems that's coming out for? Oh, the PS2. You still play PS2 games? And then like, the Scott the Woz looking ass kid, you know, joins in like, hey, you play PS2 games? And then he's playing fucking Wii games. I'm making a people for you to get mad at, but I'm just, you know, bringing up an example of how, back in the good old days, you were still kind of the odd one out, even compared to the, like, Dobson people who were like, oh, the Wii is the true fun system. And if you want to know my thoughts on motion controls, I don't hate them as long as I have the option to never touch them. Because as somebody who grew up with PC gaming, I am used to, and I hope, like, no matter with what I play, may it be my hands or my hands, I prefer, unless they're resting on a fucking steering wheel, and I don't have a sim racing setup of my own, but when unless I'm resting the hands on a steering wheel, I don't like holding my hands up in front of me. I'll always be resting them on a desk, which makes, like, a bunch of motion controls, especially with, like, the Wiimote and Nunchuck, just really awkward. The Nunchuck, honestly, isn't even that big of a deal, because whenever I'm using the Nunchuck, you can just, like, tilt your hand. But whenever there's, like, movement where you actually have to, like, get up and move, it's just uncomfortable. It's also, like, partially because I prefer playing on a PC. And so when I play on consoles, I hook them up to a monitor. And because, like, okay, well, to be fair, there was the old... I used to have my PC plugged in via HDMI, then I ran out of HDMI ports, so I unplugged it. I would need to get a DisplayPort cable for one of my monitors that supports both, but I didn't have a long enough DisplayPort cable, and it's been months and months, and I haven't... longer, even. And I haven't, like, ever really considered doing that. The fucking DisplayPort cable, I am, like, within... I'm within crawling distance of multiple stores where I could buy a fucking cable. I'm just fucking lazy. But yeah, like, there's that whole thing, right? Where even back then, compared to, like, a lot of the... Because, like, at least with the Wii bros, let's call them that, right? With your... And I want to make it clear, right? There are two kinds of, like, I'm gonna call them the Wii guys and the Wii bros, The Wii guy is, Scott the Woz. Like, hey, all Scott here. That kind of guy. And, the thing with the Wii guy... And you'll see that with, like, because in general, right, there's the... Because when you say bro, you mean it in a... I guess, like... I guess you have... the better question would be, like... I think it's Nintendo fans in general, right? Like, you have the Nintendo fan and the Nintendo chud, right? And I know chud is used in a, like, political context. I mean, I've used it in that context. But, chud in its original form... is a reference to the 1984 movie called Chud, Cannibalistic Humanoid Underground Dweller. And though it has, I'm pretty sure it's probably also, like, originally it was used to describe people who are, like, politically stinky. But in general, it can be fairly easily used to describe any kind of really foul person. Somebody who you don't want to be around. Harmon Smith. That guy. It's one of those things, It's one of... It's why, honestly, a part of the reason why I've considered monetizing my channel is because I was thinking, like, I get a lot of random, let's call them remittance views from just the random stuff I've done, and, like, I don't know. The more I think about it, I thought about it in previous videos when I discussed this, and it's like, every single time, it's my fear of taxes and the prospect, because fucking I don't know that shit. I've never fucking done any of that shit. But yeah, you have that whole thing, right? Shit. And then you have, like, but yeah, you have, like, the Nintendo guy and the Nintendo chud. Because, like, the Nintendo guy is somebody who likes Nintendo games, You ask them, oh, what do you play? Oh, I'm playing Breath of the Wild. The funny thing is, a lot of people, especially, like, the, Nintendo hater chuds, won't accept this, but, like, there are so many cromulent ports on, like, Nintendo Switch. Like, the Atelier games, there are so many Atelier games on Switch. And all of the ports are just fine. They're, like, obviously graphical downgrades. But if you're fucking playing Atelier Resleriana, if you're playing Atelier Ryza, if you're playing... the Atelier Katia, something like that. The new one is only in Switch 2. But, like, you know, there are so many Atelier games on Switch, and all of them are just fine ports. There are some textures which have been compressed in a way that I would say is kind of visually shitty. Like, I think the grass in Yumiya fucking sucks ass. It genuinely looks like an N64 texture. But, you know, it's one of those things where, like, the games themselves run kind of fine. I've thought about it before, right? Because it's a PS4 to Nintendo Switch conversion, oftentimes, right? Because the PS4 has 8 gigabytes of RAM, and from that, a specific amount, I believe, was reserved before. But, like, the idea would be that then you would use maybe, like, 2 to 3 gigs of RAM for the game, like the engine and internal stuff. And then the rest, like, the other 5 gigs, would be the, you know, graphics. So oftentimes, on Nintendo Switch, when you have to cut... Shit. Oh, the ambient occlusion here works great. When you, like, have to cut some features and some things in the Switch version, obviously, you know, you gotta cut the graphics first. So you crunch down the textures to 16 by 16, like these are. Or maybe some, I don't know, maybe not 16 by 16, but you know what I mean. Thankfully, these days, you don't have to do caveman texture compression anymore, because, thankfully, in a similar way that, like, the Zerg evolve new functions, gaming companies have evolved, new forms of, like, texture compression that actually work better. There's the whole, like, neural bullshit NVIDIA's been working on. However, what I've heard, if I remember correctly, there are, like, a few issues where it's basically like a AI upscaler, which means that it eats shit in terms of, like, accurately representing the textures you're trying to draw. But even worse than ruining your textures in that way, I'm pretty sure it's kind of slow. Which means, like, if you could imagine, right? Which means that you will still need to, because, like, the idea with a texture is, whenever a texture is loaded to the, like, onto the GPU, right? It's going to be put in an intermediate format. Let's call it that. It is translated by, I believe, the driver software from, like, a JPEG, AVIF, oh, probably not an AVIF, but, you know, from an understandable texture format. Asterisk, I believe Direct Storage has its own formats. But yeah, it's, you know, turned from that format into a format the GPU can understand. And then, whenever work is being done on it from the GPU side, that is how it's doing the work, you know? But with the, like, neural thing, when does that happen? Does it happen on texture load? Because, like, then you're not actually saving any real... I mean, you're actually using some extra RAM to process the textures. Is the RAM being used when you... Sorry, is the, like, neural thing being used whenever you're drawing the texture? Because then... that would suck! If you have to, because, like, you know, you're then upscaling the texture every single time you're drawing it, which doesn't maybe sound that bad in a vacuum, but how many blocks are here? If you would upscale the polished stone slab once, that would take up more RAM, sure, but imagine how much more memory it would take and time it would take for this to go on, and this, you know, it's insanity. So I don't know what NVIDIA's planning on doing with that. And as I was saying, sorry for getting... I get distracted with technical things, if you can't tell. Shit. I'll leave it until I accidentally fall down. Anyways, yeah. Thing is, like, you have the guys who just play the games, but you also have, like, the Nintendo chuds who, they follow a lot of, like, political chud stereotypes, except for the fact that it's oftentimes, Like, they'll translate politics into a Nintendo acceptable format. So these video game journalists are coming after Nintendo because they want to destroy the video game industry. And what they mean is Metro made another rage bait article, which they've fallen for. And yeah, like, what's funny is this kind of started from a genuine place. I think it was Tears of the Kingdom. Or was it Pokemon? I forget. But in the Switch era, something that people started to notice is that even if a reviewer was relatively unknown, if they made an opinion that went against the common beliefs enough, some people would really get angry. And there were examples of people doing that to rage bait, and there were examples of people doing that because they were, their genuine opinions. It's, like, some people really just don't like some things in Zelda games. I tried playing a bit of Tears of the Kingdom. I jumped off the island, did like one quest, and realized, nah, I'm not really enjoying this. But the thing is, I realized that on my own time. That's how I'm not rage baiting, because I haven't paraded this opinion around anywhere outside of my own friend circle, where I was basically like, I told you so. But the issue is, online, a lot of... I feel like Pokemon also had, like... Well, it's a lot worse than Pokemon, right? But you have all of these, like, chuds who will see this, and instead of transparently seeing that it's, like, an attempt to, like, get attention from them, they will immediately, like, jump on it and signal boost the original articles, or, like, the original videos, talking about how, like, how dare they insult my Nintendos? Like, that's what they want you to say. They want you to get mad. They want to rage bait you. That's the point of the article. And you're falling for it. Hook, line, and sinker. Come on. And it's funny, of course, to me, because I'm not gonna fall for it anymore. Like, there was the Splatoon Raiders, it gets really good scores across the board. People are absolutely in love with it. In love with Shiver specifically. And then, like, the fucking Guardian releases a 4 out of 10, complaining that it's like the other shooters. If I know one thing about Splatoon, it's that it's specifically not like the other shooters. And that's oh my fucking god. And if there's, like, one thing which you should learn... Also, yeah, this is weird. If there's, like, one thing you should learn, whenever you're, like, looking at a lot of this stuff, always think about, could there be some monetary incentive behind this? Because that's always, the truth. Why is this guy trying to rage bait you? Well, look, he has a blue check. He's trying to farm money off of you. Why is this YouTuber saying really inflammatory opinions? Well, look, they're monetized. And, it seems that, they're making money off of this. Oh, why is this, like, article specific? This should be a great transition into some, like, fucking sponsor, like, Ground News. Which, I don't know how much people get fucking paid for this stuff. I think it's depending on your metrics, but, like, fuck me, I never use it. I hope they never find out this. If I ever get sponsored by Ground News, I hope to God they never find this video, because I'm gonna shit talk them now. There are so many of these fucking... like, stupid-ass sponsorships that I see floating about, which are all trying to appeal to the moderate, when that is, like... that doesn't really exist anymore. We are very... like, anyone who thinks of themselves as a moderate isn't a moderate. Trust me. It's like... and then it's, yeah... Ground News, so we can see the blind spots. For instance, like, left-leaning sources are saying that we are making new progress towards, like, the AIDS vaccine. Right-leaning sources are saying that the AIDS vaccine is actually trying to give you super autism with trans characteristics. Ha! Thanks, Ground News. Now I know what both sides of the argument are saying. You know, what I'm trying to say is this doesn't work. No, like, Ground News sadly doesn't work because while at the very least it has... At the very least, it has a loosely... Like, it has a political bias thing which loosely follows reality, I believe? Question mark? It's just one of those things where, like, man, why would I want to know what the fucking, what the fucking Daily Mail thinks about some, like, oh, yeah, the Daily Mail, like, makes, I don't know if they actually did this or not. It would be really funny if they did, though. Like, reports on one of those, because now, thanks to the power of AI, people are making, you know, people are making, like, deepfake videos of, you know how, like, back 10 years ago, you had, like, those, top 10 SJW freakouts caught on tape. Now they're just AI generating them, like, en masse, and people are falling for them. Like, some guy living in fucking Serbistan somewhere, you know, is making their fucking money by AI generating, you know, angry American non-passing Brickon rages at Gigachud. You know, they're typing those prompts into fucking Grok or whatever, and like the money just comes rolling in. 10,000, 10 million Serbian dinar. $5. And really, at the end of the day, you know, most of the time, if somebody is saying some inflammatory shit, they're trying to rage bait you. It's all about fucking money. Every single time I see this shit, every single time, it's money. It's money. People are trying to get money from you. And that's it. That's where it begins and sort of ends, you know? People want to extract money from you. Everything is being financialized. Everybody wants money. And the easiest way to get that money from you is to convince you that you should be mad and that you should actually feel great about giving them your money, because they're fighting the good fight. And who should you actually, here's my take, who should you actually be giving money to? Any creator who you like the work of and you want to see, you know, more videos from them. Although, something I have to say that's funny is, you'll often see this in, like, they're like, every single right-wing circle on the internet is very much like a sort of, like, shark-infested, blood-in-the-water sort of situation. The very moment, like, it's kind of interesting, because a lot of these people they'll have this aura of, like, because everybody else there is trying to LARP, then you have to LARP as well. And specifically what they LARP as is somebody, you know, of moral purity or whatever, which, as we know, doesn't exist. But that's what people there LARP as, and because of that, you'll run into situations where, oops, it turns out the guy LARPing as a moral saint wasn't. Everybody immediately bites into him like a hungry shark. There's drama. It gets resolved. Next villain of the week. And it is kind of interesting, you know, just watching all the shit unfold. Like, from an outsider's perspective, especially when, oh yeah, now they're making a video on some guy. Like, last week, he was one of their own. This week, he is the great villain. Yeah, if only Freud was alive, he would go crazy psychoanalyzing this shit. But no, sadly, we do not live in a world where, I mean, you can still do it. But, like, when I say that, I do mean it mostly as a joke. The Freud part, not that. But yeah, like, whenever you see this stuff, it's gonna end up in the same way it always ends up. In, like, a lot of internet crash outs, funnily enough. And it's like, I don't want to, like, necessarily laugh at a lot of these people, Because oftentimes people don't really know what they're doing and they're kind of pulled into it. You know, maybe the community they're a part of is like kind of cringe and shitty. And then, you know, like they kind of get pulled into this mess because everybody tells them, like, hey, you're doing such a good job. Yeah, keep making the videos. I don't really know what's going on. And then, you know, again, consider the fact that as an adult, it's your responsibility to not be a fucking idiot. But at the end of the day, if there's one thing I know for, you know, completely for certain, is that a lot of people online are really fucking stupid. And the worst part is that a lot of people, like, you know, that's the thing which people hate to admit. People are naturally, like, reactionary. That doesn't mean that a lot of the time when people use the term reactionary, they use it in a, like, political sense in terms of, like, oh yeah, somebody who's reactionary, they must be right-wing or whatever. No. Reactionary just means that, like, you know, you don't react in terms of, like, you know, esteemed moral and intellectual thought. You don't do that. You just kind of react to it, you know, gut feeling says, eat them alive. And it is natural, but so is shitting your pants. And sometimes or like syphilis. And sometimes the unnatural option, like the condom or the toilet, is superior. I could have used an example of like freezing to death and clothing and fire, but sadly I couldn't have. You know, you get me. Sometimes the natural response isn't the best one. And I feel like the number one thing that people have that I've kind of noticed with like the online stuff is that so much of the online discourse is people trying to convince you to care about stuff. There are like weird creepy people on the internet, duh. But like, then you see like these videos, oh, you know what this guy said, you know what that guy said, you won't believe, he responded, skull emoji. Bro actually thought I wouldn't respond, etc, etc. It's all of that fucking bullshit. Now, okay, by the way, now it's time to take down all the scaffolding. But yeah, it's like all of that bullshit. None of it is ever really genuine. Most of the people who make those kinds of videos don't actually care. They're just making, you know, slop videos on the next villain of the week. And that, I feel like that villain of the week thing is what kind of gets me the most. It's the fact that, like, to them, somebody being cringe or like a genuinely awful person is basically the same. Because at the end of the day, they don't actually care about if somebody, like, what somebody did or not. They care about, oh, how can I talk about this person? How can I monetize their suffering? That's basically the goal. It's never actually, you know, let's criticize this person for doing something wrong. It's just that, you know, if that happens, it's a nice bonus. Because then you don't look like a total asshole, and only a moderate one. And in a way, it is pathetic. Like, in a way, the idea that, like, you're going to, you know, make videos on somebody purely because, oh, well, my audience demands it. You know, whenever I hear those kinds of... Because some people make those kinds of excuses I've seen, like, in defense of their, like... Did I change that torch? I don't think I did. What is the command again? Yeah, hold on. No, I forgot to change... No, it's fine. Like, whenever I see that kind of response, right? Oh, did you... Oh, my audience, you really gotta, like, succumb to your audience that easily? What if your audience told you to, like, delete your channel? Would you do that? What if the audience told you... What if the voices told you something else, you know? Like, those aren't good justifications. If anything, those are just signs of weakness. Are you telling me that your audience has that much power over you that they're gonna make you do things you're not comfortable with? Well, what are you? Like, there is a term for this. I ain't gonna say it. But there's a term for this exact kind of behavior where you'll do something you may be uncomfortable with for money because the people demand it and you know it pays. But even so, analogy aside, it's still fucking pathetic. And like to be clear, whenever people say this stuff, I never believe them. I always believe that it's just something they'll say to you know, shift blame. Because if I can actually, like, you know, if they can actually be blamed, then, you know, that's mission accomplished. But if they can blame the nebulous audience, and the audience is always, you know, because the audience is made up of an X amount of people, and it's not centralized in any way, so nobody can actually do anything about them. Like, you can't cancel an audience, you know? You can, like, yeah, sure, you'll have, like, the situation where, like, oh yeah, I'm a fan of this guy, and then people pinch their nose because they know you stink. Yeah, you can do that, but, like, you can't, you know, you can't really, you know, it's really easy to shift blame onto a collective of people who are basically just, like, you know, a bunch of mini versions of you. Versus actually, like, you know, taking any kind of accountability for, like, any of the actual shitty things you're doing. And also, like, you know, we can have a discussion of, you know, how people weaponize the concept of taking accountability to justify harassment against people for literally nothing. For one thing that I will mention that's kind of important is the fact that, like, a lot of people have fallen victim to being drama-brained. So, like, oh, they had a falling out with their ex, time to write a Google Doc about all of this embarrassing shit, which nobody, like, you know, it's not actually serious enough to warrant anyone doing anything about it, but you're so drama-brained that, oh yeah, I have to create drama about this. Oh, we had a 2-week age gap, you know, just finding, because, like, what drama YouTube used to be, still is about, you know? It's finding, whenever somebody is, like, painted as a target, the goal becomes finding every single, like, little place where they stepped out of line and presenting all of it as if it was, like, another, you know, nail in the coffin. Like, you know, this guy, and the issue is, like, the biggest one is, even if sometimes there are genuine bad things which they're reporting on, the way they do it kind of removes any kind of belief that, like, this is being done out of a genuine concern for anything whatsoever. When they're like, you know, this guy said, you know, horrible things in line. He was, you know, contacting kids in DMs. And you know the worst part? He was a Sonic fan. You know, like, it's like, wow, gee, you really, like, or, like, you know, some other stuff, like, oh, he was in the furry, you know, and oftentimes you'll have, like, these situations where you are devaluing all of the, like, other things, all the other, like, horrific things somebody did by, like, also trying to get, like, brownie points with people who think Sonic is bad by, like, saying, heh, Sonic fans? Hey, am I Sonic fans? Am I right or am I right? It's pathetic. And how did I manage to... Okay, oh, I was almost standing on it. This could be an interesting minigame, honestly. But yeah, I'd like to thank you for watching. I am a little bit exhausted. And thankfully for yours truly, there hasn't been anything special. There hasn't been anything special going on. What's this little face? Maybe it's not a face. Oh no, those clouds spell disaster. But not for me. Yeah, whatever. I'll see you next time when we... better more adventures. The roof is done, now I have to think of what to actually build inside. That's gonna be the hard part. See you then, goodbye.